The morning sun cast long shadows across the parade ground at the Royal Military Academy. Queen Camilla stepped out of her car with practiced grace, her elegant coat catching the light breeze. Today marked her first official visit to the Academy since becoming queen, and she was determined to make a memorable impression. Her advisors had briefed her thoroughly about the protocols and traditions that governed these ceremonial occasions. The military aide walked beside her, carefully explaining the order of events. There would be an inspection of the guards, followed by a brief ceremony and refreshments in the officers' mess. Everything had been planned down to the smallest detail. The queen listened politely, though her mind was already racing ahead to the moment when she would greet the assembled guards. As they approached the parade ground, the queen noticed a young guardsman standing at attention near the entrance. His uniform was immaculate, his posture perfect. The red tunic and tall bearskin hat marked him as one of the elite soldiers who protected the royal family. She had always admired the discipline and dedication these men showed in their service. The queen's years of experience in royal life had taught her much about ceremony and tradition. She understood the weight of symbols and gestures in maintaining the dignity of the monarchy. Every movement, every word carried meaning in this carefully choreographed world. She had watched her husband, King Charles, navigate these moments with ease for decades. As they drew closer to the guardsmen, an idea formed in the queen's mind. She had observed military protocols countless times, watching how soldiers saluted officers and royalty. The sharp movement, the precision, the respect it conveyed. Perhaps, she thought, it would be appropriate to request such a gesture. After all, she was now queen, and these men were sworn to serve the crown. The military aide was still talking about the schedule when the queen suddenly stopped. She turned to face the young guardsman directly. He stood motionless, his eyes fixed straight ahead as training demanded. The queen studied him for a moment, noting the youth beneath the formal bearing. He could not have been more than 25 years old. What happened next would become a story told and retold throughout the military circles and beyond. The queen, feeling confident in her position and perhaps eager to assert her new authority, decided to make an unusual request. She raised her hand slightly and addressed the guardsman in a clear, commanding voice that carried across the parade ground. The moment hung in the air like a held breath. The military aide's eyes widened slightly, though his professional composure remained intact. Other officers nearby paused in their conversations, sensing that something unexpected was unfolding. The guardsman remained perfectly still, his training preventing any visible reaction to the queen's words. The parade ground, which moments before had been filled with the soft murmur of preparation, fell into an uneasy silence. The queen stood waiting, her expression one of polite expectation. She had made her request and now protocol demanded a response. What she did not yet realize was that her understanding of military tradition was about to receive an unexpected correction. The young guardsman faced a delicate situation. His training had prepared him for many scenarios, but this particular moment required both respect for royalty and adherence to the strict rules that governed military conduct. He could not simply ignore the queen's request, yet he also could not comply with something that went against proper protocol. The next few seconds would test both his discipline and his diplomatic skills. The guardsman took a measured breath, his years of training guiding his response. He knew that the queen's request, while well-intentioned, did not align with the protocols that governed military salutes. A salute was not simply a gesture that could be requested or demanded. It was earned through rank and position within the military hierarchy. The queen, despite her royal status, did not hold military rank in the traditional sense. With the utmost respect in his voice, the guardsman responded. His words were carefully chosen, balancing deference to royalty with adherence to military law. He explained that while he held the deepest respect for Her Majesty, military protocol dictated that salutes were rendered to those holding commissioned officer ranks or to the regimental colors. The Queen, as a civilian member of the royal family, did not fall into these categories. The Queen's expression shifted subtly. The confident expectation that had marked her features moments before gave way to something more complicated. There was surprise, certainly, but also the dawning realization that she had made an error in judgment. The military aide beside her cleared his throat softly, wishing perhaps that he had thought to brief Her Majesty more thoroughly on this particular aspect of protocol. The guardsman continued with his explanation, his tone remaining respectful throughout. He noted that King Charles, as the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, would receive salutes. Prince William, as a former military officer who had served in the RAF, would also receive them based on his rank. But the protocol was clear about who could and could not be saluted, regardless of their position in the royal hierarchy. Other officers who had gathered nearby maintained their professional composure. Though the awkwardness of the moment was palpable, they understood both the delicacy of the situation and the correctness of the guardsman's response. He had handled an uncomfortable moment with grace, neither embarrassing the Queen unnecessarily nor compromising the standards of military discipline. The Queen nodded slowly, processing this information. Her cheeks had taken on a slight color, though whether from embarrassment or the morning chill was difficult to determine. She thanked the guardsman for his explanation, her voice maintaining its regal quality even as she absorbed the gentle correction. It was a reminder that even royalty must learn and adapt to the complex web of traditions that governed different institutions. The military aide stepped forward smoothly, redirecting the conversation toward the planned inspection. He gestured toward the assembled troops waiting further along the parade ground. The Queen took the cue gratefully, turning away from the guardsman with as much dignity as she could muster. The young soldier remained at attention, having performed his duty with both courage and tact. As they walked away, the Queen spoke quietly to her aide. She asked why this particular protocol had not been covered in her briefing. The aide explained that it was such a fundamental rule within military circles that it had not occurred to him that clarification might be needed. Most members of the royal family learned these distinctions through years of experience and observation. The incident, though brief, had already begun to ripple through the assembled military personnel. Soldiers further down the line had witnessed the exchange, and though they maintained their positions in silence, the story would certainly spread through the barracks by evening. It was the kind of moment that became part of military folklore, told with varying degrees of sympathy and amusement. The Queen continued with her scheduled visit, but the early confidence had been replaced by a more cautious approach. She asked more questions of her aide, seeking to avoid any further missteps. The officers she met treated her with perfect courtesy, but there was an awareness in the air that something unusual had occurred. The morning had not unfolded quite as anyone had planned. By midday, news of the incident had reached beyond the confines of the Royal Military Academy. In the age of smartphones and instant communication, such moments rarely remained private for long. Several officers had discreetly mentioned the event to colleagues, and from there it spread through military networks with remarkable speed. By afternoon, journalists were making inquiries, sensing a story that combined royal protocol with human interest. Back at the palace, the Queen's private secretary received the first media calls. The questions were politely worded but pointed. Had there been an incident at the academy? Was it true that the Queen had requested a salute? How had the matter been resolved? The secretary, experienced in handling such situations, provided measured responses that neither confirmed nor denied the specific details while emphasizing the success of the overall visit. The Queen herself returned to her duties that afternoon with the incident weighing on her mind. She had faced many challenges since becoming Queen, but this particular moment felt different. It was not a matter of policy or public opinion, but rather a personal reminder of the learning curve that came with her position. Even after years in the royal family, there were still nuances to master. That evening, she discussed the matter with King Charles. He listened with understanding, having experienced his own share of protocol mishaps over the decades. He reminded her that the military had its own distinct culture and traditions, separate from the broader royal protocols. These were men and women who lived by a code that valued precision and adherence to established rules above all else. The king explained that during his years as Prince of Wales, he had made similar errors. Once, he had inadvertently worn the wrong medals to a ceremony, earning polite but firm correction from a senior officer. These institutions maintained their traditions fiercely, and part of respecting them meant accepting correction when it came. The guardsman had actually shown great respect by explaining the protocol honestly, rather than simply refusing. The Queen found some comfort in this perspective. The young guardsman had indeed handled the situation well. He could have remained silent and simply not saluted, leaving her standing awkwardly without explanation. Instead, he had taken the risk of educating a member of the royal family, trusting that his respectful tone would prevent offense. That took courage and judgment beyond his years. Meanwhile, within the military community itself, opinions about the incident varied. Some older officers felt the guardsman had been entirely correct and had demonstrated exemplary knowledge of regulations. Others wondered if he might have found a more diplomatic way to handle the situation, perhaps suggesting the matter be discussed with the military aide rather than addressing the Queen directly. The guardsman himself became something of a reluctant figure of interest among his peers. His fellow soldiers respected his adherence to protocol, even as some teased him about the attention he had attracted. His commanding officer called him in for a private discussion, praising his knowledge of regulations while also ensuring he understood the delicate nature of interactions with the royal family. Social media began to buzz with commentary, from military veterans and royal watchers alike. Some praised the guardsman for his professionalism. Others criticized what they saw as an unnecessary embarrassment of the Queen. The story took on different colorings depending on who was telling it, with details being added or subtracted to support various viewpoints. Through it all, the essential facts remained the same. The Queen had made an understandable error based on incomplete knowledge of military protocol. The guardsman had corrected that error with respect and accuracy, and both had conducted themselves with dignity in an awkward moment. It was in many ways a very human story about the challenges of navigating complex traditions and expectations. The following week brought an unexpected development. The Queen's office announced that she would be returning to the Royal Military Academy for a second visit. This time, the announcement explained, she would be meeting with senior officers to discuss military traditions and protocols in greater depth. The news surprised many observers, who had expected the incident to be quietly forgotten. Behind the scenes, the Queen had made a decision. Rather than allowing the embarrassment to linger or pretending the incident had not occurred, she chose to address it directly. She recognized that her initial response had come from a place of incomplete understanding, and she wanted to demonstrate that she was willing to learn. It was a calculated risk, but one that aligned with her desire to be taken seriously in her role. When the day of the second visit arrived, the atmosphere at the academy was markedly different. The officers and soldiers knew why she was coming, and there was a sense of respect for her willingness to engage more deeply with their world. The young guardsman who had been at the center of the original incident was not assigned to greet her this time. His superiors had decided it was better to avoid any appearance of singling him out. The Queen spent several hours in meetings with military historians and protocol officers. They walked her through the evolution of military salutes, explaining how they had developed as a sign of respect between armed individuals. The gesture originated from knights raising their visors to identify themselves, and had evolved into a formal acknowledgement of rank and authority within military structures. She learned that the salute was reserved for commissioned officers because they held their authority directly from the crown through their commission. In a sense, when a soldier saluted an officer, they were acknowledging the sovereign authority that the officer represented. It was a chain of respect and command that had been carefully maintained for centuries. The officers explained that members of the royal family who had served in the military retained the right to receive salutes based on their highest held rank. Prince William, having served as a flight lieutenant in the Royal Air Force, would receive salutes appropriate to that rank. Prince Harry, despite stepping back from royal duties, maintained his military rank and the salutes that came with it. During a break in the meetings, the Queen asked to speak with the young guardsman from the previous week. Her staff arranged a brief private conversation in one of the Academy's formal rooms. When he entered, standing at attention with obvious nervousness, she immediately put him at ease. She thanked him for his professionalism and for teaching her something important about military tradition. The guardsman, clearly moved by the gesture, expressed his deep respect for Her Majesty. He explained that he had struggled with how to respond in that moment, knowing that either choice carried risks. To refuse without explanation would have been discourteous. To salute improperly would have violated his oath and the standards of his regiment. He had chosen what he believed was the path that honored both his duty and the crown. The Queen listened thoughtfully, and when he finished, she told him that he had made exactly the right choice. She explained that she would rather be corrected and learn than remain in ignorance. His honesty, she said, reflected well on him and on the military as a whole. It was the kind of integrity that the armed forces depended upon and that she valued in those who served. News of this second visit, and particularly of the private meeting with the guardsmen, began to reshape the public narrative. What had started as an embarrassing moment of protocol confusion was now being discussed as an example of humility and willingness to learn. The Queen's decision to return and engage more deeply had transformed the story into something more positive. The incident and its aftermath had broader implications than anyone initially realized. Within military circles, it sparked renewed discussions about protocol education and how best to handle situations where tradition intersected with the modern royal family. Training programs began incorporating scenarios that dealt with protocol questions, using the Queen's experience as a teaching example. For the royal household itself, the event prompted a comprehensive review of briefing procedures. The Queen's staff recognized that assumptions about what knowledge members of the royal family possessed could lead to uncomfortable situations. They developed more detailed briefing documents that covered not just ceremonial procedures but also the reasoning behind various protocols. Public opinion about the Queen herself shifted in subtle but meaningful ways. Many people found her response to the situation admirable. In an age where authority figures often refuse to acknowledge mistakes, her willingness to return to the academy and learn from the experience resonated positively. Social media comments, which had initially been mixed, became increasingly supportive. The guardsman's career took an interesting turn as well. While his commanding officers ensured he was not singled out for special treatment, his handling of a delicate situation had been noted by senior military leadership. Several months after the incident, he was selected for an accelerated leadership program, recognizing not just his knowledge of protocol but his judgment under pressure. The story became part of military academy curriculum, used as an example of how to balance respect for authority with adherence to regulations. Instructors would present the scenario to cadets and ask them how they would have responded. The discussions that followed revealed the complexity of military service, where rules and human relationships must both be honored. Within the royal family, the incident became something of a learning moment for everyone. Prince William, with his military background, discussed with family members the importance of understanding the distinct cultures of different institutions. The military, the church, parliament, and the civil service all had their own traditions that must be respected, even when they seemed to contradict royal privilege. The Queen herself became more confident in her interactions with military personnel. Having faced embarrassment and worked through it, she found that her subsequent visits to military installations felt more authentic. She asked more questions, sought deeper understanding, and developed genuine relationships with service members who appreciated her sincere interest in their world. The media gradually moved on to other stories, but the incident remained a reference point. Whenever discussions arose about military protocol or royal duties, someone would mention the salute incident. It had become part of the collective memory, a small moment that captured something larger about tradition, respect, and the ongoing evolution of the monarchy. For historians studying this period of the monarchy, the incident provided valuable insight into the challenges of the modern royal role. The Queen had to navigate between being a symbol of tradition and being a real person learning and growing in her position. The balance was delicate, and this moment illustrated both the pitfalls and the opportunities that came with such visibility. The young guardsman, when asked about the incident years later, would reflect on it as a defining moment in his service. He had been faced with a choice between easy compliance and difficult honesty, and he had chosen the path that upheld his oath and the standards of his regiment. That the Queen had later thanked him for it remained one of the proudest moments of his military career. Years passed, and the incident faded from immediate public consciousness, though it never quite disappeared. It remained a story that surfaced occasionally in articles about military protocol or profiles of Queen Camilla. The way it was told evolved over time, with some versions emphasizing the humor of the moment, while others focused on the grace with which both parties had handled an awkward situation. The Queen's relationship with the military deepened considerably in the years following the incident. She became a patron of several military charities, and made regular visits to bases and hospitals where injured service members were recovering. Those who met her noted her genuine interest in their experiences and her respectful approach to military customs. The early misstep had transformed into a foundation for authentic engagement. The guardsman rose through the ranks, eventually becoming an officer himself. His career took him to various postings around the world, and he served with distinction in several challenging environments. When colleagues learned about his role in the famous incident, they often expressed surprise at his humility about it. He never used the story to promote himself, viewing it instead as simply doing his duty. On one occasion, many years after the original incident, their paths crossed again. The Queen was attending a military ceremony where the now Major was receiving a commendation for his service. As she pinned the medal to his uniform, their eyes met with mutual recognition. She smiled warmly and remarked quietly that she was glad to see him thriving. He thanked her with genuine appreciation for the opportunity to serve. The exchange, brief as it was, encapsulated something important about how the incident had shaped both of them. For the Queen, it had been a lesson in humility and the importance of continuous learning, even in positions of great authority. For the officer, it had affirmed the value of upholding standards with respect and dignity, even when doing so carried risks. Within the Royal Military Academy, the story became part of institutional memory. New cadets heard it during their orientation, presented as an example of how to navigate difficult situations with integrity. The emphasis was not on the embarrassment of the Queen, but on the professionalism of the guardsmen and the grace with which both parties had ultimately handled the matter. Royal protocol experts occasionally cited the incident in their training sessions for palace, staff and government officials. It served as a reminder that protocol existed for reasons beyond mere formality. These traditions embodied histories, values, and relationships that deserved respect and understanding. Knowing the rules meant knowing the context in which they operated. For the British public, the story had become one of those small human moments that made the royal family seem more relatable. In a world of carefully managed public appearances, an honest mistake and its sincere resolution felt refreshingly real. It reminded people that even those born or married into positions of privilege had to learn and grow, just like anyone else. The Queen herself, in private conversations with family and close advisors, occasionally referenced the incident as a turning point. It had forced her to confront assumptions about her role and authority, leading to a more thoughtful and engaged approach to her duties. The embarrassment of that moment had ultimately made her more effective in her position. The lasting legacy of that morning on the parade ground was not about protocol failure or embarrassment. Instead, it became a story about respect, learning, and the importance of upholding standards even in difficult circumstances. Both the Queen and the Guardsmen had demonstrated qualities that the military and the monarchy claimed to value. In doing so, they had reinforced rather than diminished the institutions they served. The salute that was never given had communicated more about duty and dignity than any formal gesture could have conveyed.